Welcome, one and all, to the 25th anniversary of the Fantasia International Film Festival. I am so happy to be here on this beautiful August night to be presenting the Q&A for The Righteous. It's one of our world premieres this year. It's a beautiful, haunting, and honestly completely unique horror film coming out of Canada. It's honestly a pleasure and a privilege to be here tonight with so many of the cast and crew. As always, for the people watching from home, you can send in your questions at any point during the Q&A and I will get to as many as possible. So I'm going to start by introducing everybody we have here tonight. I have Mark O'Brien, writer, director, as well as actor, who is Aaron in the film. We have Henry Czerny, who is Frederick in the movie, Jason Clarke, our production designer, Andrew Staniland for composer, and Kate Corbett, who is Doris. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you. It was my first back in the cinema presentation was The Righteous, and I can't imagine a better experience. So I'm just super excited to be kind of continuing this journey with you. I hear so many people watch tonight, like over 200 streams, which is pretty huge.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for a Canadian film and for a virtual festival, which is the second screening too. Like, awesome. Like, congrats, guys. Like, the hype is already starting up.
Well,
awesome.
So I guess for the audience, let's kind of jump in. Mark, I would love if you could kind of explain the kind of ideas behind the writing of the script and the kind of creation of the story, because it is so singular and unique, especially within Canadian horror cinema.
Well, it really comes from the idea of confronting the things that kind of burrow deep within you and how you deal with that, and how those things kind of take on a sort of narcissistic quality, while at the same time, you're trying to search for the right thing to try and be a better person. And I think those things kind of haunt us all in ways that we're either semi-conscious of, or completely conscious of, or completely unconscious of. So it's always a bit of a murky water, and I just think it's such a universal theme that I thought it'd fit well within the horror genre, and also within the themes of religion, and kind of the guidelines within religion, and the rules within religion. And I also wanted to do something that kind of played with genre and played with tone, so you challenge the audience by sucking them in a way that they're probably not even completely maybe aware of sometimes. And that's kind of where it came from. And it evolves like any story. Once you start working on it, it kind of becomes its own thing. And that's sort of what it became. But the crux of why I wanted to make it always kind of remained true.
And so much of this film is kind of these central performances. There aren't actually that many characters in the movie, which has a very on one hand, I would say it's there's an effect of kind of a play, but it also kind of lends to this claustrophobia. Do you want to talk a little bit about the casting process for the film, especially since we have two of the actors here?
Yeah, I think Henry's a little in and out there. He has rough service where he is, just so everyone knows. He's not so disgusted he can't stand it. Yes, it is sort of like a play, but also I never believe in writing something for a budget. I knew we wouldn't have much money, but it was more about, like you said, the claustrophobia of the characters. And I think when people are hemmed into a situation, you find out who they really are. And in this situation, it kind of feels like no one can leave, which I've always thought this film is sort of a nightmare. And in a nightmare, no one can really leave. There's no kind of exit point. And you kind of wake up not really being aware if it was in color, and not really being aware of how it ended, and not really being aware of how it started. All you know is that subconscious feeling that you've had. And sometimes when you have a nightmare, it's directly linked to something that happened 8 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 2 months ago, or 20 minutes before you fell asleep. And I find that kind of fascinating. So when it came to casting, like, you know, with Kate, I knew Kate would be perfect for it because Kate's a phenomenal actress and she has a great emotional availability that is rare, that I knew she'd be able to give. And knowing her personally too, I also wanted to work with people who I love and people who I know I'd have fun with and they would enjoy it and kind of go on this with me. And I always think like there's an idea of chemistry amongst actors. I don't believe in that. I think great actors make chemistry. And I knew that Kate would have that completely. And for Henry and Mimi, Henry is just, you know, I've looked up to Henry's work for so long, and he has this great persona of someone very strong and astute and in control. And I thought that was even more interesting to sort of twist and to see how far he'd fall. And Henry's not afraid to do that and go for that vulnerability. And Mimi just has a complete emotional awareness that's really overwhelming. She really has to do very little to convey a lot. And same thing with Nigel Bennett. Nigel Bennett, I think, provides a lot very simply, and he has a certain gravitas to him and a certain command of like you feel like he should be the one telling you all about something that you don't know. And same with Mako Nguyen. Mako has such a strong heart to her, and I knew that it was like she represents what a small community this is, and that people do care for one another even when you're going through something as crazy as this. And you know, but despite your community, you're still wrapped up in your own problems.
Kate, I'm wondering kind of when you read the script the first time, what were your impressions of the character and kind of the direction it was going to go?
Well, Mark gave me a gift because he just offered this to me, and as an actor, auditioning is you know, it's a process that I've come to love sometimes, but when a director just says they wrote this for you and this is yours, it kind of gives you a certain confidence with it right off the bat. But with Doris, she didn't really have much confidence, so it's kind of like play the opposite of that. The script, I had to read it a few times to like really grasp what Mark was going for. And then he told me some films to watch to kind of get in the same tone. And that helped a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, like you know, there's something about Mary.
Exactly.
You know, like some of those kinds of films.
Yeah.
So, you know, just to get it in the right.
And I'm from Newfoundland, so it was just nice to even go home to shoot, right? Mm-hmm. And interesting to be a part of a project that was shooting in Newfoundland, but didn't use it as a location, because usually when people shoot there, they use the Newfoundland as a character almost in itself. But I feel like Mark's script could have been anywhere.
Yeah, there's this kind of dreaminess to the whole thing, really, right? So the Newfoundland elements are kind of integrated in the sense that it has this like very beguiling, out of place atmosphere.
Yeah. Sometimes when I'm in Newfoundland, I say it feels like it could eat you alive. It's
wow.
Out there. And I get that sense when I watched the film for the first time. It kind of feels like the rawness.
It's always in your bones, the weather, no matter what it is. And I also think that the name of a place kind of can take you out of a film as opposed to a feel of a place is much more interesting to me. And I don't really care when something is set or where it's set. I want to feel it. And I think, once again, it makes you a participant.
And so central to so much of what goes on in the film is this house and this like very singular lived-in location. We're very lucky to have Jason here, who is a production designer, who could kind of maybe go into some of the nuances of creating that environment.
Yeah, well, when Mark originally sent me the script and started sending me these reference films, I started pitching, okay, what about American Gothic cottages? It's a thing. I think with that architecture of American Gothic cottages, you always get those points and those angles, and it's always something feels kind of off and uncomfortable about them. So I think that was a good start to go with, and finding that in St. John's, Newfoundland, was like, oh, this could be a challenge. But we only looked at 2 or 3 places, and then we found this place, and it was, you get the feel, like when you walk into a place and you feel it. I find when I'm production designing, it's like I can feel the script in this space, and it. I think we did. I think when we walked in that space, Mark, I think you even said, like, this is it. You did. You instantly said, this is it.
Yeah.
And I did some work in there. I did some wallpaper. I did some painting, but and I dressed the place. But like, it had the bones, and once we had those bones, we ran with it. It worked for us. I think it worked fantastically for us.
And another element that kind of plays into it, obviously, is the music. I think this is like an incredible score, and it kind of like underlines the horror and the uncertainty of the film. Andrew, if you kind of elaborate like the creation of the music, because I think it's so singular and just elevates the film to another level.
Yeah, it was a very collaborative process between Mark and I from the very beginning, actually. And I tried to make every choice in the score non-arbitrary, so there had to be a reason to choose one thing or another. So the scene when Aaron first arrives and he's wounded on the ground, and there's Frederick going for the knife, and then you hear, and there's these disruptions in the cello, and it's a knife on a cello string.
Wow.
Oh, cool.
Hitting it. Yeah, and nobody would ever know that, but it's the little details that I guess give you confidence as a creator that you know that every little detail is like is for a reason, and it's because of a discussion with the director, or it's because of something that you've seen in the cinematography or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the black and white really played into that a lot, because much of the score is one thing against another. So a cello against strings, or high strings against drone. It was very part against part, if that makes sense. So I really tried to lean into that, and I know it's a horror film. It's kind of weird to say, but we had a great time writing the music. We really did. It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
So I already have some questions from viewers, so I'm going to kind of go into them because I think they're really great questions. So I have a question from Lindsay Dunn. One of my favorite bits is the sequence when Aaron finally confronts Frederick about their true relationship. At the end, Aaron moves across the room quickly. How did you manage that effect?
That was a tough one. So as we're talking about this, spoilers are okay? I mean, is everyone watching have watched the film?
I mean, we can make a warning right now that if you haven't watched the film, this is maybe a time to tune out and go watch the film if you have the opportunity. This is also going to be on YouTube later, so like, don't feel like this is like a FOMO situation. You can come back and watch it.
Okay. So there is a part where someone moves very quickly across something, and to be honest, I'm just going to be purely honest. I saw that in one film. Spike Lee utilized that a lot, but Spike Lee, what he would do is he'd put the camera with the dolly and move with them.
Yeah.
A lot more, and it's in Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. In his Bram Stoker's Dracula film, there's one moment where Dracula just moves across. Now he's playing Dracula, so when it happens, it's almost subliminal as a viewer, because it's Dracula. He has supernatural tendencies, so you're kind of just like, whoa, as opposed to like, what the hell? And I felt like there needed to be a moment. Basically, throughout the film, it's like the breadcrumbs of the story are coming out, but also the breadcrumbs of what can potentially happen is coming out, because it's really a subconscious story. And I think the threat becomes more and more severe and more surreal and more terrifying. So in that moment, I thought it was necessary that we have just a hint of it. And it also leads to, he wakes up right after that. So you're like, it kind of, I don't want to stir the audience. I do want to stir the audience because I like kind of playing with that, but it's also his subconscious. It's just his view of things. So to do it, that whole scene, I'm actually on my knees on a dolly. So it looks like I'm standing, but I'm actually on my knees with my hands behind my back, holding on to the dolly. As I'm talking, I'm like, you can, you will. But I'm holding onto a dolly the whole time. And when when I was pulled, we have to stop. So you don't, and we had very minimum focus on this film because it was very low light and it was anamorphic and yada, yada, yada. So when I got very, very close, I couldn't even move forward like that, like a bit of a jerk. So I had to stay completely still. And it was really tough. And it was also at the end of the day. And Jason, you were there. I
was there, yeah.
It was really tough to accomplish, but we had a great dolly grip, and we had a great team. Sean Dorn was actually the guy who was pulling it, and he's incredible. I've worked with him many times. So, you know what was cool about it, though? Everybody was just on board. I was like, so I have to do this crazy thing that like I've never done before. I saw in one movie, and it was totally different context. But that's just what we're going to do. And everyone was like, cool. I was like, awesome. And it's one of my favorite parts of the film, actually, because it catches you. It's a moment, whoa. And I think the movie's about that. Instead of one just big explosion, I think you got to have little increments so that the explosion of something towards the end, you've been teased.
I know for me, watching the film again, what kind of struck me, which is something that the first time I kind of experienced it didn't, is how the edit itself actually kind of contributes to that unease, because you have like these really like sharp cuts that kind of take you into a completely different mind space. Like you kind of talked a little bit about the waking up, but there's a lot of other little details. Do you want to discuss maybe kind of the thought process behind the edit in order to kind of contribute to this greater sense of dread?
Well, a lot of it was, it's kind of like what I was sort of touching on. A lot of it is the pacing of the film is actually, you actually break down what happens within the story. It's actually kind of mainstream, like the way it moves. It certainly is a slow burn, but like, to me, the most important thing in the edit was the emotion of the characters. Like, we kind of talked about it a lot before and during and after of like, it's so important to spend time on the grief of what happened. And that's where Kate's part comes into play so heavily, because you can't just gloss over like a child's death. Like you can't just be like, oh, she died, on to the next thing. It's like, it doesn't really work that way. And in fact, I was just watching some old movie where they kind of gloss over something like that. And I was like, wow, like that lingers. So the edit was really about mostly about showing the weight of that at all times. And then the pace picking up at just the right moments. Because I think a thing needs to build, but I also think you need to keep the audience not sure what's going to happen next. And there's little cuts. I mean, my favorite cut probably in the film is when I'm telling a story and it cuts behind my head. I had my hands like that. And that was something from the beginning. That was in the script. It was like, I really, really wanted that, because you're like, whoa, what does that mean? And I love those clues a lot. And I think we found that pretty well in the edit.
Mm-hmm.
So I have another question from the audience. This one's for Kate. Kate perfected the affect of the neighbor that comes over after a death to comfort the grieving, and then they end up having to comfort you. Spoilers again, but hopefully if you haven't seen it, you already tuned out and we'll be back. Of course, the relationship to the departed ends up being much different than we initially guess. How did you work out the nuance of that character?
I read a bit about what it's like to give up a child at birth. And I worked my head around, just the feeling of not being fit to raise a child and knowing it would be better if it was raised by someone who was fit. And then I think with Doris, when I got to the core of her, it was very people-pleasing. Always trying to just please everyone else around her, but not focusing on what the trauma is, the grief inside of her. You know, she talks about her dad. She talks about, boys. She talks about everything but the deep, dark trauma of, number one, giving up a baby, and then number two, having that baby's death, It took me a good few days to get over playing Doris. I was home in Newfoundland and my mom was a bit worried about me because I remember lying on the bed for like 2 days straight after playing her, because the grief takes a toll on you once you put it in your body. Yeah. Being a people pleaser is not a good place to live.
Yeah, I actually felt really, because Kate was so, in every take, it was so good. And I remember like a couple times I came over, I was like, just one more, I just want to do this little thing. And I looked at her face, I was like, oh my God.
Well, I read some of the reviews and oftentimes people say it's a bit like a play.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to read that because Mark, my very first day on set, I only had a few days, but was the big monologue of me showing up at their house, what that audience member is talking about. And when I went to block it for the crew, I kind of felt like I was on stage a bit, like just the whole, you know, the setting, the house, like the big room. And I was trained in theater. So in some ways I almost like, you know, the feeling of acting in a play a little better, because there is an instance where you just have to do it. There's no like tiptoeing into it. You're there with a page monologue.
I know sometimes like when people talk about a film and kind of compare it to a play, sometimes it's kind of meant as like a negative, but I always see it really as this kind of platform of like, in a way, dreams are like a play, right? There's an element of artifice and you're filling in the blanks. That is where like the stage begins and ends.
Mm-hmm.
And
to add to that is when you, I think sometimes when people liken something to a play is obviously when there's monologues or when there's like, you know,
performance driven too.
But to me, it's like what I love about theater, and when you see, like, if you watch a Patty Chayefsky film, like, you know, Network or The Hospital or something like that, every character is given something. So when I think of like something that feels like a play on film, a lot of time, and it isn't a play, it actually wasn't a play to start with, Fences or Doubt or something like that. And to me, it's always really interesting because I'm like, actually, the difference is that every character just actually has a backstory. And they actually have a point of view. And there was a lot of talk in this film of like the dream sequence with Ethel is like, do we need that in the film? I was like, absolutely. That's her character. That's who she is. Like everyone has to mean something so that when they lose or gain something, it means something. And when you glaze over someone, and it really killed me. There was a scene with Mako Nguyen, who plays the police officer, that I had to cut. It was just, there's a number of reasons that she was fantastic in the scene. So was Henry, but it just didn't work for other logistical reasons, and it killed me because it gave a backstory for her as well. Her character was actually pregnant, and I just thought it was interesting. She's about to have a kid and stuff, and we kind of laced in. I kind of laced in this idea that everybody's sick. Kate's coughing in the scene, and at one point, Mimi is coughing. And throughout that scene that we had to cut with Mako, she's sick and she's wiping her nose. And it's like there's a sickness, which also could be the reason why people end up having problems throughout the film.
It's so strange that then COVID happened.
I know, that's
everybody's got this weird cough.
Yeah.
Did Mark put eggs on the world?
Yeah. I didn't know it had that kind of effect.
So I have some more questions from the audience. So Nick Johnson would like to know, the lighting was gorgeous. Can you talk about the choice to go with black and white?
So I conceived it black and white the day I started writing it. It was just a black and white film. And a lot of times, like when you're convincing people that it has to be black and white, which is not always the conversation, is it just has to be. It's a better movie black and white. Also, it's a murky story, and I think subconsciousness is murky and it's not clear, and mystery and suspense are more amplified when you can't fully understand something. When something's black and white, you can't understand it as well as when it's in color. And once again, really it goes back to that this movie's a nightmare, and I've never remembered the color of my dreams. It just happens. And I thought that just would make the story better. It would make me communicate the story better. It was no for any kind of pretension or like, I'm going to make a movie in black and white. Like, obviously there's an aesthetic value to that can be really beautiful. And Scotty McClellan, who shot it, is amazing. And I think it does make the cinematographers very excited because everyone wants to try it once. But myself and Scotty and Jason, we really were just like, no, it just works. It's just the reason to make the story better. And Jason was great in that too, in the sense that like everything we did was textures. So you get to look at something from a different angle. It's the tone and the texture as opposed to the color. and we conceived everything in black and white. Everything Jason showed me was like, how would that be in black and white? And Jason, one of my favorite parts still is when Mimi looks out the window and sees us swinging, and the curtains. I still love those curtains so much.
Yeah, it's amazing. You know what I love? I love that that first, I don't know, first or second shot, we actually see the three of you guys in that room and you're on the couch. And that frame is so beautiful, but each Mimi and oh God, I'm drawing a blank. Henry. Long day, man. I've been scouting all day. And they're just framed within a frame of that black curtain, you know? It's just, yeah, it worked out so well. It's beautiful.
Remember we went over those photographs for forever, the ones we were gonna, the paintings?
Yeah. Well, that painting behind Henry's head in the dining room is what is it? The Slaying of Abraham's Son. And that pose in that painting, you never really see it in the film. You might see it on the big screen a little bit, but that pose in that painting is almost the identical pose when he kills you on the floor in the living room.
Well, and also when he holds me that first night.
Yeah, when he's holding you. Yeah, it's yeah. I love doing stuff like that, putting in these little moments like that in sets. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
So the next question is from Tara, and it's kind of a continuation of what Nick had asked. Were there some specific films from the visual style and the shot composition that you took inspiration from?
Boy, howdy, yes. As everyone here knows, I love watching movies, and like over and over and over. So there were many, and it's funny because sometimes like you watch movies and you're like, is my movie too much like this? But I can't help if those movies influence me so much to want to make something. Like you kind of can't help that. I'm hugely influenced. Maybe my favorite film of all time is The Passion of Joan of Arc by Carol Theodore Dreyer, and that kind of gave me the idea of kind of like the pale face that everyone has, but especially my character. And I was saying in the Q&A, I don't know if you remember, Justine, like I also kind of like the pale face from Bill and Ted that William Sadler has his death. So inspiration comes from anywhere. Winter Light for sure by Bergman, and Cries and Whispers by Bergman, and Ivan's Childhood by Tarkovsky, and even The Lobster by Yorgos Lanthimos, and so many. I mean, all the work of Hitchcock, but I would say Paul Verhoeven's films. But ultimately, I would think the biggest influence for me in tone is Michael Haneke, because Michael Haneke and David Lynch, they leave you kind of reaching for more. And I think The White Ribbon, if we're talking about visual, and especially Haneke, that was a black and white film, and it was always leaving me wanting more in the best way. So all those were reference points among many others that I'm probably not even fully conscious of.
Night of the Hunter.
Night of the Hunter. We talked about that a lot.
Something About Mary.
Something About Mary.
Yeah, Rosemary's Baby too. I mean, I remember Sky and I talking about that too. Like, a lot of it, even if it doesn't end up making its way into the film. But you know what we did? Like, I don't like storyboards because I can't draw, and trying to describe a drawing to a storyboard artist is just like it's just a waste of time. So a lot of it is filmic references. So we had Blade Runner 2049 up there on our in Scotty's office. We had movies that have nothing to do with our film at all, that were just kind of reference points. It was like a shot kind of like that. Denis Villeneuve's work. So yeah, it was kind of all over the map.
And I think one of the most important elements of the film, and I think why it resonates so much, is this kind of exploration of dread. Do you kind of want to talk a little bit about that?
I think dread is the most interesting thing you can watch in a film. I mean, it can at times be synonymous with suspense, because that's what suspense is. It's dread of something to happen. And I think when you show your cards too early, you lose an audience completely. And something for me, like, I'm new to horror. I was never a horror fan until a few years ago. But like something that really kind of I grasped onto was like The Wicker Man had a big effect on me, because it never really, some horror films, it's like a great start to the film, and then by the end you're like, that's what it was about, like, and it just kind of lets you down because it's too unbelievable or kind of silly. And so for me it was really important that the dread continues, and when it's rooted in an actual emotional event, like losing a child or or having abandoned a child or something like that, then it's more real than the act of the supernatural phenomena. Phenomena should be secondary, I think, to the emotion. And that's probably just from being an actor a long time and not getting to play the correct emotions sometimes. You get frustrated. You're like, but this should be happening. They're like, we don't care. We want to see you shoot a gun. And you're like, oh, man. So I think that was really important to me. And I think when you heap things onto your characters, it's only interesting.
Mm-hmm. Another question from the audience, from Eli. The conversations between Henry and Mark were so engaging and intense. Can you talk about developing that dynamic?
Well, as I was saying earlier, I think chemistry is born out of good actors. And I'm not saying I'm a good actor, but I understood this part. I really understood it because I wrote it. And Henry is just so uniquely available, like emotionally. And I think it was, to me, it was the job more of me as a writer to be like, okay, how does this move on? It's an 8-page scene. Like, we got to like, there's got to be twists and turns. And I think there's important lines where I say, like, what else are you ain't supposed to do as a priest? Where it's like, whoa, he kind of caught him for a second, and now we're friends again. And now he's like kind of catching him for a second, so that it's a push and pull. So it's not just one gradual line. It kind of has ebbs and flows. But I'll say, like, working with Andrew, I think Andrew did a great job within those scenes too, of like when I start telling a monologue about throwing rocks, and it's just like this slight kind of sideways music that comes in that Andrew did, that it's like, if that wasn't there, that scene kind of dies. And I think in several of those scenes, like, it's really important, those little bits that you can find. And Andrew, I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I thought, like, just finding those ways in and out and letting the silence play at certain times too was so important. But I one of my favorite notes from the film is that beat when I'm telling that story, Andrew.
Yeah, for sure. And that idea, but when you talk about throwing the rock at the catfish, and this idea of a rock saltating across a pond becomes this sort of leitmotif in the score too, with this skipping of the cello, the sort of this sort of sound, that these ripples, right, that happen. But the tension between the tension between in that scene when you're telling that story is just so palpable. It's the first real big crescendo into the dread that is coming. It's it's really something.
Great work, man.
And I think overall, this sound design is really incredible. And Mark, you just kind of alluded to, like, the importance of silence within the film.
I think you got to earn those. I don't think you earn silence. I actually think you earn music. You earn score, because the silence should be there a lot of times, because there is in life. And I think things hit you harder. Like, I'm always amazed by, like, a movie like No Country for Old Men that has no score in the entire film. Like, there's zero score. Or Michael Haneke films. None, zero, absolute zero, because he's telling the story through silences and when you earn them. And there actually aren't a ton in this film. So I guess it's from, I mean, Kate, you know what it's like when you're an actor, like, you kind of inherently feel when a silence is earned. And sometimes it's okay to talk about it. It's okay for it to be technical, to be like, there's like a pause here. I actually, in my scripts, write a lot of pause and beat, because I think it just helps you as a reader and audience member. I love a silence, but I hate too many. Yeah,
and the thing about it is, an editor can always take your beat out if he wants to.
Yeah. That's what I told Henry a lot. I was just like, just take forever. I'll just cut it later. We're not shooting on film. It doesn't cost us anything.
Yeah. And this is a relatively small budget film. There's a lot of intimacy in terms of not only what ends up on screen, but kind of behind the scenes as well. Do you want to talk about working on a small scale for a movie like this?
Well, I think, Justine, I might have told you this. Like, we had 15 days. We had to cut a day, 5 days into shooting. We were 16, then became 15. And we had 7 days of prep. Well, I had 7 days of prep. Jason and our DP, Scotty, they were in Newfoundland. I was shooting in New Orleans, so I came home for 4 days, went back to New Orleans for 2 weeks, and then came home for 3 days, and we started shooting. But myself and Jason and Scotty were in constant communication, and our producer, Mark, I talked to him every day anyway about stuff, but we were in constant communication. So what was great about it is that, like I said, I don't like the storyboard because I don't like to lock in too much. You don't know what's going to happen. You got to kind of be open and change things. But the constraint was a blessing in a way because I've been on big films where, you know, we have more time to shoot it. And they're like, let's just shoot it like this because we have time. But I don't think that's conducive necessarily. Like I kind of really admire directors I've worked with who we have the money and the time, but they wrap early, not because they want to go home, but because they know they got it. And I actually kind of like that. Like if you went into the editing room with us, there's very little that's left out of this film because we knew what we wanted. We knew what we were shooting and we really knew what we were going for. And so the constraint was actually a blessing, but it's 15 days. I mean, for 650,000 Canadian. So it was very, very small. But we had a great crew too that worked their butts off.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you talked about this in the Q&A that we had in the Imperial, but for people who weren't there, I think also what's super important about the work that you do, and then kind of everyone that you have involved is this sense of love and play and kind of engagement with cinema and what you're doing. Do you want to talk a little bit about the importance of not having this kind of like rigorous, like dictator director?
Well, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
What I love is this. It's a sense of community. There's nothing better, and all you guys here can talk about it as well. Like we're so lucky to get to do this at all. It's so hard to get a part. It's so hard to make a movie, and it's so hard to even be in a position that you are physically able, or in a country that you are able to do it. So when you get there, it should be fun. And if it's not, there's a problem. And it's just like, you know, when you have a friend you don't really like or someone you know, and when they're calling, you're like, oh, I don't want to answer that. Like, it shouldn't be like that with anyone you're working with. And when I got to call like Andrew and we were going over the score, like it was exciting. Like I was like, I want to talk to him. This is fun. And he's like, yeah, I want to do the movie. I was like, awesome. This is going to be cool. I can't wait to see what she does. Like, I think it's absolutely imperative to making a film because this is not just our job. This is our life. And you got to enjoy it, and I'd rather have a less successful film but enjoy what I'm doing than having a more successful film and having hated it, because that's what we're here for. And these guys are so fun to work with. I mean, Jason, you know, we had such a blast. You know, sorry, a side story. Talking about a community and love and all that kind of stuff. Jason and Scotty, our DP, and we went out to lunch.
I was wondering if you were going to bring this up.
We went to Manna Bakery in Newfoundland. And I had a prosciutto sandwich, and I've been wanting to make a movie forever. And like the guys knew that, and we're like, oh, like, this is so exciting, everything. I was so hungry because we're scouting all day, and I was like, and I started choking, and I was like, whoa. And then Scotty looked at me and was like, do you need the Heimlich? I was like, like nothing coming, no air at all. Like, and I started like reaching for chairs, falling over, and he saved my life. He literally did. Scotty literally saved my life. Heimlich, and I spit it out, and it was so funny because 4 minutes later I was like, wow, I could have either been dead right now or finishing the sandwich, but I'm finishing the sandwich. So that's a real sense of community. But you guys know what it's like. You guys have worked on.
I just continued eating my sandwich.
Yeah.
It's
fine.
Scott got him. It's all good.
Real sense of love.
You know, I have yet to have a Manna sandwich. I've lived in Newfoundland for 10 years and I haven't had the sandwich yet.
Don't do it, they'll kill you. Yeah. They'll get you, Andrew. I'm telling you right now.
Yeah.
So I have another question from the audience. For Mark, is there any genres that you would like to create through writing, directing?
Any genres?
Yeah, I think it's like any genre that you'd like to work on as a writer or director.
I'm really driven towards sort of this psychological horror idea, but I actually wrote a sort of a sci-fi western that I'm really trying to get made, and another witch movie that I'm working on right now with Mark O'Neill, the same producer, as well as a sort of sci-fi horror. And really though, I've been working on those for a little while, but I just started writing something that I've never really seen before, which I think would be really cool, is like a crime horror. I like bringing horror into genres that you've never really seen it before. Even with this film, like it's not a whole lot of God-fearing horror movies, because even the Bergman films weren't really horror or psychological horror. They were more like just dramas. So I find it interesting melding genres and leaving the audience not sure what the hell they're going to watch. And it sort of tickles me in a way because I know, like I showed this to some friends who were kind of like, I don't really know what this is. And I was like, good. It's just something different. It's something new. Like it's a funny reaction sometimes from audience members or friends or people who watch anything. They're like, yeah, but what is it? I'm like, well, you watched it. And they're like, yeah, but what is it? I'm like, decide. And that sort of weirdly, in a perverse way, makes me giggle.
I love that though. That's David Lynch, right? That's
Yeah.
a David Lynch film.
What is it? Like, why?
What is it? What the hell did I just watch?
Yeah, I love it.
Well, you watched it.
What's that quote? Comfort the uncomfortable and do the opposite for the comfortable, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As opposed
What's
to like,
the quote? I screwed it up.
you know what you're talking about. But it's new. I think it's funny to twist it and kind of I talked to someone who really, really didn't get it, and I almost loved it more than someone who did.
Right. Yeah.
In a way, like, because I was like, oh, it had an effect on you that I know you're going to think about it later. So yeah, it's interesting.
And I guess, I mean, there is this like such a strong religious element. I think it's very like specific in a lot of ways, obviously, but there is something so universal about it. In kind of engaging with this religious side of things. You're obviously dealing with very universal themes, but within this context of the Bible, to a certain extent, at least priesthood, was there something about that was very important to you, or is that just something that kind of emerged?
It is important to me. Like, I grew up going to church, Catholic church and everything, and we went to school. We had religion class and everything. Like, I think a lot of public school in Newfoundland, if not all.
Same as me.
Yeah, it was very, very common. Jason, probably the same for you.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
So what I found interesting about it is that, like, you know, I stopped going to church when I was younger. Our family just stopped going at a certain point. But what I find interesting is that there are rules. There are rules written in those books, and even if it's not the Ten Commandments, it's still like there are rules written out. And so when you have these images, and a lot of it is fear, and it's not a knock on Catholicism. I think Catholicism is beautiful. It helps a lot of people. Who am I to say? But any religion or any kind of higher power contains fear because you want to please it. And I just think that that's an interesting thing. That's an interesting battle to have, because even for myself, if I do something that I don't think was the right thing to do, which happens all the time to everybody, I don't know if it's God that's making me feel that way or it's just me or whatever. Either way, it becomes your own kind of idea. And if you've been brought up in this realm of believing in these thoughts and these images and these rules from this book, then those will plague you to whatever degree, good or bad. I think it'll be a part of your thought process. So I just find that fascinating. There's no bigger stakes than God and the devil. And there's Henry.
You know, it's cool to hear you say that. I remember one of the first questions I had for you was, are you religious? Before we started working together, I wanted to know, because I was brought up Catholic, but now I'm like a passionate atheist. and I was really interested to know like where are you going with this? And then I based on your answers, I realized this story works for anybody. It's not about being Catholic. It's not about being Protestant or some other or even atheist. It's like these things that stick to you, you know, these like that. It's universal. It's,
if you don't relate it to God, maybe you relate it to your friend or your wife or your husband or your like whoever it is that you're trying to do right by. And God is universal. Sorry, Kate?
Or your dad endorses
yeah,
cake.
Yeah, exactly. Or your son. Like, you know, it's fascinating for dramatic stakes.
It's stapled to our consciousness.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's also this sense with Henry's character with Frederick that he's kind of pulled between his kind of allegiance to God and that responsibility, and then his wife, who he loves, like potentially on the same level, and this also absent daughter. There's kind of like a pull, a push, and this kind of like equivalency as well that's kind of gets confused and mixed up.
Well, I think it's also like, you know, it's hard to run away and start a new life and think that everything's just going to be buried from the past. Like, it's like that, you know, we may be through with the past not through with us. Like, can't just start over again and pretend nothing happened. Right, Henry? You're muted. Henry, your addition is unparalleled. You're still muted.
It's okay. It's good.
I'm not muted anymore, pal.
In session.
Oh, man.
I've been watching. It's been lovely. It's been lovely watching the conversation, but I just managed to log back on. Yeah. Dread. Dread. I know all about dread. I've been living it for the past 15 minutes.
But 15 years, right?
Probably 50, I would say. Yeah.
Oh, Lord.
I mean, technically we are finishing up soon. But now that you're back, Henry, would you like to maybe discuss kind of your experience working on the film?
I loved it. It was fantastic. I loved reading it. I loved working with Mark, Kate, Mimi, the crew. It was astonishingly delicious. Mark was after the deepest, most intimate aspects of human behavior, sharing them and loving them and reminding us all that we have them and look into them, and you'll be better if you do. I loved it.
I guess my final question for the night is going to be kind of just an open-ended, if anyone else has any kind of experiences or something that kind of had happened during the film that they'd like to discuss that was fun or haunting or life-changing, anything.
I had an experience trying to log into this webinar that was pretty haunting.
It's life-changing.
You know what? Actually, oddly for me, the haunting experience was actually when Henry logged into this webinar.
That was going on throughout the entire shoot. That kind of banter between takes. It was necessary, I think. Gallows humor. We talked about that earlier.
It was ridiculous, which is very odd when you watch it. Like, it was. I mean, we didn't have any laugh takes really, but like, it was
no.
Very silly. I was haunted by almost choking on a prosciutto sandwich. I mean, that was probably the most haunting part for me. Actually, and when we filmed the last scene in that living room where all the chaos takes place, we shot that all in one day. That was really daunting. We did a lot. I think we did 24 setups in 8 hours, and we started the day with Kate's shot where I don't want to say too much, but when I blow and make something happen. We did that for the whole morning, and then after lunch we're like, we have 24 setups to do the finale of the film. And I'll say this: when we did there's a 2-shot with Henry and Mimi towards the end that I was planning to get coverage on. We didn't have any time, and we did 2 takes, and it was so beautiful what they did, and it was such with experienced actors like Henry and Mimi, where it was just they took their time, and it's a 4-minute take, and it just works. And when you watch it, it couldn't have worked any other way. So it's funny how it's like the gods kind of work in your favor, especially when you have great actors.
Yeah, I've got a question for you, Mark.
Sure.
Are you able to see the film with distance now, or are you still too close to it? Like when you watch it at the festival, can you see it for what it is, or are you still seeing the shots and all the background? You know what I mean?
I've gone past that 85 times, and then in it, and then outside it so many times that I think I can. I think I can see it outside it. I think I can. It's hard to know that I can, but watching it in a theater, I certainly felt it because it was a new experience. I hadn't seen it like that. It was a different film to me. But yeah, I think I kind of could. I was like, this is a piece of crap. No, I'm joking.
It's because it helps having like people next to you as well, taking it in for the first
I glanced over. So in the screening, I glanced over, and there was a woman sitting next to like 3 seats over, and I remember glancing over, and she was, I swear to God, because when I'm in a theater watching and I know the director's there, I'm always kind of like, I want to get a look at their face. Almost like when someone cuts you off in traffic, you're like, I have to see what they look like. It was almost like that. I was like, you want to see the person's face. And I looked over at her a couple times, and she was looking at me literally like this. What is wrong with you? All right.
I think that's such a high compliment.
Watch the movie; it will help.
I was like, turn your head.
Oh my gosh.
He was having a Fred moment, perhaps.
So, yeah.
Oh my god.
Comes in the box down there.
What's that?
She joins in the
Yeah. Here. I think, yeah, it was haunting. I was like, I'm trying to watch the movie. Because, I don't know, either she loved it or she hated it. I couldn't.
It's impossible.
Okay. I'd like to thank all of you for being here tonight. It's honestly been such a pleasure, and having the experience of sharing this film with our audience has been so incredible. Just reading the first reactions and reviews, I'm just so happy people are connecting with it so deeply. Like, that's so crazy. And yeah, thank you. And I'm excited to see where this film goes next and to see what everyone is working on in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for your support. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So have a good night, guys, and see you soon. Enjoy.
In my defense, I'm in the middle of cottage country, so there you go.
Forgive you.
Bad for you.
Not because I'm old.
Henry, just because you're late doesn't mean you can stay longer. We all have to go.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to stay for the next 15 minutes that I missed. Anybody has any questions?